Let's see here. Hello and most welcome to a little lecture about the universal man. This is supposed to be perceived as a criticism of the universal man that is a great part of enlightenment thinking. I have previously mentioned in connection with Paul Feyerbend how generalities come to capture our thinking. That is the perception that there is a sort of a single thread in reality that rules everything. Vaguely a bit like J.R.R. Tolkien's One Ring to Rule Them All. It is the essence of everything. And this universalized man, I would say, has many traits together with what you may call them Newtonian thinking, that where everything is put on a background, a canvas, and this canvas is absolutely blank from the beginning. It doesn't contain anything. In Newtonian thinking, that canvas is space in three directions and time going perpendicular right through it. In the enlightenment thinking, it is more that we have certain factors that are abstracted from reality and we can use them as modeling points. And this universal man is definitely one of them. And Maistre is mentioning, the French philosopher Maistre is mentioning that it is new thinking. Already in the 18th century he had this realization, man did not exist before. Well, of course, yes, you have singular man like the man over there, or why not a group of men standing over there, or the man that takes part in a specific enterprise, the men at war. But once you start talking about the man in general with any connection to anything else, you sort of abstract away also the reality of the word man. Maistre is also saying, or Maistre, that rights and laws cannot be universal because you see, in the same process as in the Newtonian thinking, everything is derived from this absolute space and time. Likewise here, everything is shaped from the beginning of being, the universal man, which is later placed in a specific country, with a specific background, with a specific tradition. So first you have man, and then you have traditions. This is a reversal of how things used to be. First and foremost, once upon a time, you were an Italian. You were a townsman. Or you were that certain person named André Richelieu, something similar. So this reversal and the introduction of something that doesn't have any resemblance, Maistre would say, to anything real. And once you have this sort of established in this new, weird, obtruse language game, you can continue. to say that this universal man also deserves certain rights. Very parallel to how you do it in Newtonian thinking, where you start out with the universals, time and space, and then you go higher up in the hierarchy. So you allow rights for the universal man. And thereby you are ignoring all that happened before. And this needs to be put in a certain specific example. Why not take the French Revolution? For the first time, sincerely, people start talking about the rights of man. What did this lead to? Well, it led to the reign of terror. Yes, indeed. Because it ignored the actual, real duties and traditions that keep a real society together. So something was extracted, and in this extraction process, something very vital was lost. Life itself was lost. It's a bit like taking the heart out of an animal, a roe deer for instance. Would it then still be alive? Would it be that roe deer in general? No, it would be dead. Maistre take the Constitution as an example, and he claims that it should be made just like a suit of clothes. It must fit a specific body. It must fit the body it was made for, as it evolved to fit. Sort of, you try out the clothes, or even better metaphor is, you grow into them. A constitution for universal man was, in his view, a constitution for no one. So by seeking the essence, we lose everything. I can try to give you a little help here. Compared to the thought of perennialism, which is something within theology. That is the idea that all gods are similar, no matter what faith or religion, creed you belong to. It's all the same God, and it's all the same worship, prayers. You think that you are actually distilling the most important thing in the concept. Therefore, there is a lure here. There's something luring and makes you thinking, I should fall for this. This is so tempting. This distillation makes more rational sense than this messy thing. Can you see how the lure of enlightenment keeps us attracted to this unspecified, generalized thinking? And once you're caught in this, you are by yourself. You yourself as a person, you are also abandoning the specific uses of words and language that helps you keep yourself connected to reality. So you change your own thinking, and in the end, you'll be so hardened, perverted, that you lose connection to yourself, because it's no longer anything specific. It's about everything and nothing. Let me put another philosopher in here. Just let me grab my cup of cacao. Do you like my cacao? Michel Foucault also was a visitor to my country, Sweden. He lived in Uppsala for a while. According to Foucault, man did not exist as an object of study before the classical age. In the classical age, scientists studied things like plants, animals, and money, but yet they did not study man as a central, unified, biological or psychological being. But in the enlightenment, around the year 1800, a new episteme, a framework of knowledge emerged. For the first time, human beings became both the subject, the one who knows, and the object, the thing being studied by biology, economics, and linguistics. So as a result, man was born as a specialized field of knowledge. It was almost like a creation of a new language game. A stumped, amputated language game with no history, but still. And Foucault uses this term to describe Enlightenment's view of man. For once you could say it's empirical. We are physical objects in the world. We have bodies, we work, we speak. But secondly, we are also transcendental. We are the source of all reason and knowledge. In here, Foucault comes to a critique. Foucault meant that this doublet is indeed a contradiction. We cannot be the objective thing being measured by science while also being the godlike source of all truth. This tension makes Enlightenment concept of man unstable. Foucault meant that the era of man was ending because of structuralism. He noticed slowly that the 20th century thinkers were beginning to show that humans are no longer sovereign masters of their own minds. For instance, we do not speak language, language speaks through us. We aren't rational masters. Our unconscious and social structures dictate our behavior. As a conclusion, if the universal man is just a byproduct of a specific historical arrangement of knowledge, then as that arrangement changes, man will vanish. he concludes with a haunting visual metaphor that perfectly capture his critique of the Enlightenment's universal objects. If those arrangements were to disappear, then one can certainly wager that man would be erased like a face drawn in sand at the edge of the sea. So this is this instability where the subject construes its own object and thereafter claims to study it himself. Indeed. So it's a bit of summary of the whole thing. The feature of origin, that is, in enlightenment, it's an eternal, rational truth. Foucault, on the other hand, claims that it is a historical invention from the 18th century. Agency, the master of his own history and reason, according to enlightenment, and according to Foucault, a cog in the structures of language and power. In enlightenment, it is the foundation of all knowledge. Foucault's view, an unstable concept destined to be replaced as time goes by. I will bring in another generality or universal construed by Paul Feyerbend, briefly mentioned many times before. And he targets the method with a big M, I think to be compared to, which often you hear falsely this day, mathematics with a big M. The idea that there is one single thread going through all understanding, a singular method. So he points his finger to the myth from enlightenment that there is a universal reason or one singular scientific method that can cover everything. He, in similarity with Maistre and Foucault, believes that there are no abstract rules that apply to all times and all cultures. To that, you might add all places. For Feyerbend, it's a competition. So universal truth is a tool for the ones in power or in lead, the experts, the institutions, and used as a tool to silence local thinking, local traditions. This is to be paralleled of how today universal man is used actually to silence real liberty, real freedom. For since, following the arguments I lay forward, since the universal man is unstable, it is like drawing something in sand close to the water. It's not really there. And assigning rights to this creature, this golem, if you like, doesn't really mean anything. It's like giving nobility to a pine bush. I think there was actually a British king that knighted a bush. That does not really mean anything. So therefore, since you cannot be a universal man, nobody has seen the universal man, spoke to him, or anyone can identify with universal man, sorry, there are no rights endowed to this universal man. You see what I'm getting to? The actual centerfold, the nexus, I use the word nexus. The nexus of the whole thing is unstable, unclear. It is not founded in anything specific that is real. Therefore, all the rights, all the good things that, so to speak, the enlightenment like a Santa Claus brings to us, they do not mean anything, because there is no such thing. Very equal to how in Newtonian physics, since universal time and universal space do not mean anything. Something that we found out in the 19th century already. Since they do not mean anything, everything that is built above it also lack meaning. To designing reality to something that is placed on a specific point in an unspecific area, unspecific space, that also has no meaning. And listen carefully, I don't say it has little meaning or some meaning, minuscule meaning. No, I said no meaning at all. You designate something, you give properties to something that doesn't really exist. It's not specific. Therefore, it has no meaning at all. You can, within parentheses, you can think of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It becomes much less weird now. It's not about uncertainty. What is it about? It's about certainty. Isn't that odd? By sort of entering into what generalities mean or do not mean, we solved a big problem. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle goes from being an unknowing paradox to be something that actually endows understanding. Isn't that great? I'd say that beats definitely repeating paradoxes too much, because a paradox is something you do not really understand. So this deconstruction, or I wouldn't like to call it deconstruct, it's actually a revealing. That we build something on no reality. Everything built on top will become unreal as well. Here I'm going to expand the understanding of Feyerbend a bit here. He talks about cultural murder. And he argues that Western export of universal reason to other cultures, they committed cultural murder by forcing everyone to follow the same rational scientific standard. The Enlightenment destroyed local wisdom, myths, and alternate ways of living. He called for a separation of state and science. Isn't that interesting? Just as we here in Sweden had a separation of state and church, he said science and state needs to go separate ways. Otherwise, the scientific method will be an tool for destruction oppression. You hand over what is meaningless. You endow people, the man, with rights that doesn't mean anything, because they are as ephemeral as the universal man himself. They are also universalized. What does it mean for something to be real? Well, it needs to be located, have a locus somewhere. Not in the three-dimensional Newtonian scheme, which is unreal, a generalized scheme. No, things need to be somewhere in the real world. Just like this cup I'm holding in my hand. So by extension, one could actually say that Foucault is making this to be a culture murder, but that could be paralleled and seen also in equivalence or parallel to the murder we already become, that we made to ourselves. Already made to ourselves. What sort of murder is that? It is the generalization of everything in our own culture. Taking away the specificity, taking away what makes a thing unique, what makes a thing authentic, thereby eradicating the thing. Let me amplify this. This is an example I got from E. McGilchrist. E. McGilchrist talked about the Civil War in England, where the Puritans could be called one of the pioneers of universalism. They said holiness should be everywhere. Therefore, they took out the stuff from the churches, rid them of what made them specific and real, and said, no, God is everywhere. When God is everywhere, He is nowhere. Do you see the connection here by universals? By making something universal, you eradicate, you erasure. It loses its locus. It loses everything. Things are real because they are specific. And this can also be compared to what we find within mathematics. I think it's now past years since I last mentioned Bishop and constructive mathematics. But there is also a similar trend to see all numbers as being equal. The one between 5 and 6 is equal to the one between 10 and 11. And this is also a sort of thread that is drawn through all understanding. Or at least we look for it. We project it to be there. We have the desire for it. But the thing is, our desire does not mean it's there. So let me give you a trope here. Imagine the Enlightenment as a building. Foucault would say that the inhabitant, man, could be said to be a ghost created by the architecture of the house. Feyerbend would point to the blueprints, universal reason, and says These plans are fake. They do not actually describe how the house was built, and they are being used to stop anyone from building a different kind of house. Isn't that interesting? Listen to this massive critique. This is not something you can read in the newspaper, hear on the radio, or even in a podcast. It is unusual in its particularity. This is why I like Feyerbend and Foucault. Is who else questioned the idea that it would be just to copy Newton, Descartes, and try to use it for something completely different? To fake something. Just by hearsay, you think you can universalize, and you will at least get a shadow of what you're looking for. And I remember when I grew up, it was also often mentioned about, especially communist states, that they were all good in theory, but in practice they didn't work. Feyerbend would say the opposite. The very idea that there is a sort of possibility of moving Newtonianism into completely different areas, in stark contrast what he would have wanted himself, and apply them to whatever you want with any practical use, and say, I hereby hypothesize that this should work because I want it. I need it to work. That could never ever happen. And we know today, I would say, that this misuse, these fake formulas has been used, have and still continue to be used to suppress others' type of thinkings and to suppress even truth. Because truth is not generalized. It's not a universal concept. It's not true for the people or for man or for woman, for that matter. Let me also add a little bit more here to maybe clarify this soup. I hope it doesn't become too unclear. In his later work, especially the Blue and Brown books and philosophical investigation, Wittgenstein diagnosed what he called the craving for generality. He saw this not just a minor error, but the main source of philosophical confusion. The main reason for suffering in man, I would add. This is why we have neurosis. This is why, as Ian McGilchrist points to, man is more sick today than he'd ever been, no matter if he does exist or not. To Wittgenstein, this craving is the irresistible urge to find a single unified essence or a definition for a word, regardless of how differently that word is used in real life. We're back to universal man again. Who met him? Where does he live? Can you give him his address? Is he in the neighborhood? What sort of food does he like? Does he like bacon in the morning or porridge? It's a trap. It has a lure, and we often think about that lure to be into the theoretical. It's not. Some people would say that it's a lure into an otherworldly reality. That is not of this real. No, you cannot escape reality. So what does happen when you cling to universals? Well, what happens is that you start malfunctioning. Displeasure is a definite outcome of not being in the world where the only place where satisfaction can be received. I think we need to rethink completely what does alienation mean. Does it really mean that we are alienated towards the world? Or does it mean that we actually are denying us access to the world or the pleasures of the world? Because isn't the pleasure of understanding the greatest pleasure you can have? Or at least one of the greatest ones. By universalizing, you lose that pleasure. So the urge to go in that direction of universalizing is actually an anorectical thinking. You are denying yourself. And when you look at yourself in the mirror, maybe you see this creature that is full of faults, irregularities, errors. So you're a perfect being looking into the mirror, and what comes back to you looking into this enlightenment mirror is bad man. Isn't that horrible? So when we're all trapped in this, we start to think that human beings are bad. They are prone to subjectivity or objectivity. This is why Wittgenstein helps. It heals you. The thinking, especially in philosophical investigations, it is a way of leading you out of the fly bottle, because you are to be eternally trapped within there as long as this urge of generality, of this urge of destroying the very language that you need. It's about almost like biting into the hand that gives you food, or cutting off the umbilical cord long before you are born. You can imagine what the result is of that. He also expands this, and it makes it even more interesting as he progresses in his thinking, that is Wittgenstein, how this comes in to be the scientific trap. In science, you could say we look for one single law, like gravity, and that should explain everything in different events. And philosophers try to do the same with language. The scientist asks, what are the common property of all gases? And the philosopher will ask, what is the common property of all beautiful things? At the same time as possibly the scientist's question is productive, because it has a purpose. Limited, but there is a purpose. The philosopher, or we human beings that fall into the trap, is just seduction. Because it assumes indirectly, implicitly, that we use the word beauty. There must be a thing, an essence that is shared by every use of that word or of every object. And thereby we have constructed something of an essence. The solution is family resemblance. Family resemblance is a lesson from Ludwig Wittgenstein to maybe ease up these dependencies, this horrific addiction to generality. and to see it as a game. So what sort of game do we have? We have some that are competitive and some that aren't. One game or play could be ring a roses. Some could involve skill, others involve pure luck. Some are played for fun, others are professional. There is no essence in common. Instead of a single essence, you see a complicated network of overlapping similarities, like the features of a family. One brother has the father's nose, the sister has the mother's eye. Eyes, that should be. Let me give you a hint, something that I also sort of struck my head with when learning about Wittgenstein, reading philosophical investigations. Do not for a second think that we are losing out on something. That Wittgenstein writes and says that the beauty of the world as unified, having a singular trait, is wrong, rids you of something. You lose something. You lose a type of understanding. That is absolutely wrong. Even for a second thinking that will lead you to a wrong understanding completely. You don't lose anything at all. Remember what I said, generalities are fake. They could be very luring, tempting and irresistible. And once you got used to them, as Bishop showed in Platonic mathematics, you cannot let go of the idea of one singular mathematics, and that all of mathematics needs to follow the rule of the excluded middle. The rule of the excluded middle is actually the thread you're looking for. There is no such thing. It becomes a strong intuition, and I would say once you sort of dwelled into this too far, too long, you will be like the poltergeists in the movie Poltergeist. They can no longer come back home because they've been stranded outside heaven or whatever they were looking for in Poltergeist too long. They do not really discern between real and fake anymore. This is what happened with us in generalities. We get so used to the fake things that when reality comes, we can't see the difference. We cannot tell a copy from the original. But note here, the copy is not real. It doesn't even have the semblance of the original. It doesn't have any connection whatsoever. So here you can hear the ones of you who are familiar with Ian McGilchrist, and this, I mentioned this to help with the understanding. The left hemisphere, the representational hemisphere, according to Ian McGilchrist, is just that. It's a specific tool that generalizes. It doesn't extract from reality, it's just generalized, because that's a very helpful tool in a moving world. But reality is not that. Representations are not reality. An animal that believed in universals would not withstand evolution. And here's another trouble that Wittgenstein pointed out. Philosophers suffer from a one-sided diet because we are so used to this confusion, so we build our own examples based on this. We think, for instance, an example as brain in the vat can help us to some understanding, or not. The problem in itself is false, fake. Looking into it won't lead you anywhere, nowhere. It will capture you even more. It doesn't lead anywhere. The same goes for the get-here problem and epistemological problem. Looking into that, trying to solve it, or even reading about it will put you on the wrong path. Because there is no general understanding. It could be very, very different seen from a general perspective. This is the first step, moving up the ladder. And once you move the whole way up the ladder, you can kick the ladder off. You won't lead it anymore because you stepped away from confusion. The world will become real once more, and you will have connection with yourself. Because you lose both the outside and the inside simultaneously. This is one of the results of universalism, because you universalize your own thinking. So it's very seductive, and you are thinning yourself out in this anorectic struggle where you look for things that have no meaning whatsoever. It's like a monetary system, it's that German Reichsmark during the worst inflation. But you are the person who really wants to stick to this money. And the more you stick to it, the more you attach yourself to these things. And the harder it is to appreciate real money, real wealth. I think the last thing I want to point out there is no generality to generality itself. It is not like it repeats itself in history. It is not like it was destined to happen. Somewhere in language, a mistake was made, so to speak. It doesn't have a natural history. It's very important to understand. It was not destined to be this way. The confusion was completely unnecessary. Very important. This confusion was completely unnecessary. I can imagine there are many examples in everyday life where confusion is not completely unnecessary. Like if you step on the wrong train, there would be a reason for that. You misread something, or someone pointed you out in the wrong direction. In this confusion, there is no reason. Just like there is zero loss in understanding that we were tricked all the time. We don't lose out. These are two traits you need to look for. Then you will understand you're going in the right way. But if you think you're losing out by not using the word mathematics with a big M, then you're still trapped. The richness in the world is also its beauty. The specificity, this is the last thing I'm going to say, then I will end. The specificity is not in contradiction or antipose to universals. Universals have nothing to do with specificity. There are even specificities that could look like universals, like the word penguins or areas, cities of the world. They are still specific and real. This makes it more tricky, but it's well worth it, because there's nothing more satisfying than taking away something that you're attached to, which doesn't have any value. Think of that. Because usually when you pay taxes, you get rid of something, you get something in return, but you have to give away some certain part of your salary, fortune to the state. But in this case, you're not losing anything. It's a complete 100% win. This I mentioned not to sell in the concept, but look for this trait. The very moment where you're losing nothing in your understanding, then you're on the right path. the ladder that took you out of this misery is not really needed, because the illusion is also fake. It's a fake illusion, if that makes any sense. I say thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.